support. Please donate on the Law Matters 1030 website. Law Matters publishes shows as we make them. So sign up for notifications on whatever platform you use to stay in touch. Our guest today is Mike Vigil, former Director of International Operations for DEA. Thank you for joining me.
It's always a pleasure, Sherry. Thank you for having me.
You know, I was doing some research preparing for this show, and there's just so much to talk about. I heard we have or potentially will have a new attorney general who was Trump's personal attorney, and it's expected that he's going to close the Epstein file and no documents will be released. Have you heard that?
I have. And here's the crux of this whole situation is that Donald Trump got rid of Pam Bundy. She was a complete loyalist and she weaponized the DOJ. And the client was not the United States, as has been the case historically, but she served one client, and that was Donald Trump. But now Todd Blanche, the former uh, Trump attorney, personal attorney, as far as I'm concerned, given the fact that he basically defended Trump against all these accusations where he was convicted of 34 counts of fraud, really makes Blanche unfit to lead the DOJ. And also handling the Epstein files. It's a horrific conflict of interest. And let's not forget that Blanche's 2025 closed door interview with Maxwell, which was intentionally crafted to avoid any, eliciting facts that might incriminate Trump. He barred victim attorneys from attending these sessions because he was trying to cut a deal. He was trying to keep Maxwell from, making statements against Donald Trump and his relationship with her and also with Epstein in terms of the extraordinary pedophile group that I'm convinced that Donald Trump was actually, very, very involved in that. And although the DOJ has basically released 3 million pages of the Epstein file, Sherry, it is estimated that another 3 million pages remain unreleased. This is a failure, really, to comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Under Bondi, they have been, stemming the flow of these documents. They have redacted a lot of these pages and files, and they protect the that were involved with Epstein, but they didn't redact the names of the victims, which was one of the main caveats that they were supposed to comply with. So, that placed the victims in great danger where they could be intimidated or coerced. The DOJ also faced backlash for trying to remove photos from the website showing Trump with unidentified women. And now Blanche is defending the action as necessary to address privacy concerns. Well, they weren't concerned with the privacy of the victims. So Blanche stated that this saga, and that's the word that he used, this saga should no longer be a DOJ concern. It should be one of the major DOJ concerns. To the contrary, this is a case involving significant damage to a lot of young women, a lot of pedophiles that still remain on the loose, pedophiles that are in political power. And Blanche is going to try to cover this up. And his loyalty, like Pam Bondi's, is to Donald Trump. It's not to the American public. It's not to the victims of crime. And under Blanche and Pam Bondi, Sherry, do you know that they closed 23,000 criminal cases. This is no longer the Department of Justice. I call it the Department of Injustice. There is absolutely no justice being meted out by the Department of Justice, and then other individuals like Cash Patel, and his firing many members of the FBI. It's just a comedy hour.
Just want to touch base on that a little bit because they're firing people who were assigned cases that involved Trump or his people in his administration or his Proud Boys or his Oath Keeper people from January 6th. FBI agents, DEA agents, no federal agent says, gee, I want that case. Let me pick and choose. You get assigned a case. These people are being fired because they were assigned a case. That's ridiculous.
You're absolutely right, Sherry. And, this is nothing more than vindictiveness, sheer vendetta, because you're right, as an agent, especially within the FBI, you're assigned cases. You can't say, well, I don't want to work that case or I want to work this case. They're assigned to you, whether they be white collar crime, whether they be terrorism, whatever it is. But here, what they've been doing is that they've fired a lot of the individuals that were involved in the theft of classified documents that were found at Mar-a-Lago. They have fired individuals that investigated the Russian interference one of the 2020,
2016.
yeah, the first election of Donald Trump, where they did find that there was Russian interference, and then now they're firing people that deal, with investigations of cryptocurrency, things of that nature, because Donald Trump and his family are now into cryptocurrency. So what they're doing is they're purging individuals who have not done nothing wrong except do their jobs, and it's such a farce, and this is something that should concern all of Americans, because we right now in the middle of an authoritative regime, and if it continues to progress, we may never be able to get back to full democracy.
That's true. I also heard that, Pete Hegseth, they filed impeachment paperwork for him. And I'm just wondering, was that before the fake Bible verse at the Pentagon prayer service or after?
Well, this actually happened on April the 15th. House Democrats filed 6 articles of impeachment against Hegseth, like I said, April 15th, and they're accusing him of high crimes and misdemeanors, including abuse of power, war crimes, and mishandling of classified information. The resolution, Sherry, introduced by Representative Yasamin Ansari, is considered a long shot in the Republican controlled House, but they're going to file it anyway. The issues are an unlawful war against Iran, the targeting of civilians, and then the reckless signal gate misconduct, where they included a reporter, and then Hegseth was passing classified information, especially on the attacks that were going to take place against the Houthis in Yemen, to his wife and brother, bragging, very much like a
Like,
frat boy. I call him the frat boy because, he's always can look at me, look at me. So I hope that even if they don't do it now, that later on, unless he and other members of Trump's cabinet receive pardons, that when we get a new administration or the Democrats take over, the House and the Senate in the midterms, that they can remove him from power, because he's incompetent, and actually, he's a white supremacist. Everybody's seen his tattoo of white supremacy, and he is incompetent. And our brave, very brave servicemen and women deserve a competent leader, not an individual who has been a drunk most of his life and has been accused of sexual assault. But under this administration, it seems like that's a prerequisite to being nominated to a high ranking position within the government.
I also heard that recently Trump's attorney, John Eastman, is disbarred over the bids of trying to overturn the 2020 election. And he's the one that orchestrated filing 60 frivolous election fraud lawsuits, all of which were thrown out of various courts across the country as Trump continues to try to control the vote. Have these people not learned if you work for Trump, you're going to get in trouble?
Absolutely. And you're right. Sherry Eastman was disbarred in California on the 15th of April this month due to his role in efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The California Supreme Court, upheld the judge's finding that Eastman made false statements to courts and officials, which violated attorney ethical duties and engaged in gross negligence by peddling election fraud theories without any evidence. And you're right, they filed approximately six, which were all thrown out. They had no evidence whatsoever. But he was a primary architect in the plan to have fake electors submit votes for Trump to Congress and pressure then Vice President Mike Pence to block the, the certification of Joe Biden's victory. This is a very nasty person. And here's another.
Think of all the attorneys who have been disbarred because of Trump.
Right.
Giuliani got disbarred.
Yeah.
And the other guy, what's his name? What's his name? Mike Cohen?
Yeah,
He got disbarred.
one. But let me give you a little bit of a historical tidbit. Is that Eastman was a former clerk for Clarence Thomas, probably the most corrupt Supreme Court justice that we've ever had. So what's the old saying, Sherry? Birds of a feather flock
Locked
together.
together.
But yeah, there were a lot of people that were disbarred. You mentioned Rudy Giuliani. Then you had Kenneth Chesebro, Lynn Wood, and then others that were disbarred and were sanctioned were Jeffrey Clark. You'll remember Sidney Powell, who took a prominent role in trying to decertify Joe Biden's victory. And then you had Jenna Ellis. But at least 17 attorneys have been sanctioned by various courts for their roles in that 2020 effort to overturn the elections. But as far as I'm concerned, this barment is not good enough. These people should be in jail.
Yeah, quite a few of them should be. One of them did go to jail. One that I know of, Cohen, went to jail. Isn't that his
Yeah,
name?
yeah,
Yeah,
Michael Cohen went to jail, and then now he's one of the most outspoken critics of Donald Trump. He talks about a lot of things that he did for Donald Trump. You'll recall one of those being is that they called uh, the university, which was attended by Donald Trump, and threatened them with legal action if they disclosed his transcripts because they were horrible. He had horrible grades, but they were so ignorant that they didn't understand that a university cannot basically disclose transcripts without the authorization of the student. But they still went and threatened the university.
yeah, it's ridiculous. And I understand too that Trump's already got a list of Supreme Court justices to replace anybody who might retire. Hopefully, we get him impeached before that happens.
He does. He's already made statements that He's already considering several individuals, a retirement, for example, from either Alito or Thomas would trigger several significant shifts, Sherry. Replacing a justice in their mid 70s with a younger conservative justice could cement the court's 6-3 conservative majority. And that could affect the court for the next 30.
Yeah, good. But does Trump know that the attorney has to have an active license? They can't be somebody disbarred like all his loyalists have been,
Yeah, well,
or is he going to fix that too?
he probably doesn't, but I'm sure that they're going to advise him. But listen to this, his fourth appointment would give Trump more influence over the court's composition than any other president since Richard Nixon, if you can imagine that. And
Well,
with the
you can impeach people on the Supreme Court as well. It's only happened once before, but it did happen.
and
So
that
they can impeach. And I still don't understand why Clarence Thomas, after what he did was so egregious. Number one, he shouldn't have been put on the um, court. I don't understand why he hasn't been impeached.
well, the
He
thing is that
nothing happened to him.
what we have is basically with this administration, an organized crime unit that would rival, probably all of the five, mafia families in New York. The five mafia families in New York, have never committed the horrific crimes that this administration has done. But with the 2026 midterms approaching, Republicans are motivated to fill any vacancy while they still hold the Senate majority. So I'm sure they're going to probably try to pressure Thomas or pressure Alito to leave since they're in their mid 70s and try to appoint somebody that's very young so that they can still maintain control over the Supreme Court. And replacing Alito and Thomas with a similar conservative person would not change the current ideology, the balance, but would ensure that high profile rulings, such as on abortion, on abortion protections, presidential immunity, and tariffs would remain in place. And that is a major problem for the United States and other countries throughout the world.
I heard this week that Dr. Oz says that Trump thinks diet soda kills cancer cells. I was thinking you should tell him only if you drink it while you're eating KFC.
And he's a junk food junkie, that's for sure. But
Yeah.
you know, you know, that is very true because you'll recall during the COVID pandemic, Sherry, when he was advising people to drink bleach and that would cure COVID. Remember that?
He never demonstrated, though. I kept waiting for the demonstration. It didn't happen.
Yeah, but there were people, for example, not only here in the United States, but in other countries. I know of certain examples in Central America and South America where they actually drank bleach based on the opinion of Donald Trump.
Oh
But
my God.
was interviewed by Donald Trump Jr. in one of his podcasts, and he was talking about the fact that Donald Trump believed and drank several, Diet Cokes every single day because, according to Donald Trump, if you poured a soft drink onto grass, that it would kill the grass, and therefore he opined that it would also kill any potential cancer cells. Here's another fact: is that Dr. Oz mentions a scenario where he was aboard the Air Force One with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's in his seat drinking one of these orange flavored Fanta soft drinks. And Dr. Ross told him, really? Are you drinking that? And he said, look, he says, this is healthy for you. because it's fresh squeezed orange juice. There
Such
is no orange juice in Fanta orange soda. It's all glucose, it's flavored, and then it has dyes. But here's a little bit of a tidbit for you also, is that the Fanta that is sold here in the United States has not one drop of orange juice. But in Europe, Fanta orange soft drinks do have about 3 to 12% orange juice. That's the difference between Fanta in Europe and then Fanta here in the United States. Kind of interesting. And then Donald Trump, here's another medical fact that that Donald Trump tries to pass on is, I should say, false narrative instead of fact. And he also says that he likes junk food like McDonald's because these fast food places, according to him, have strict health requirements,
oh my God.
which is not the case. And but what can I say? This is the way this man, the way Trump's brain functions.
He said in South Carolina, there are some monuments that apparently he wanted QR codes to go on these statues, and they banned it because they don't know what the QR code's going to say, kind of like the hall of whatever presidents that he built inside the White House, where he's got all these snarky remarks. Did
Yeah,
you hear about that? Did
I did, in South Carolina, and this bill that they've already gotten through the South Carolina Senate, Sherry. Now it's going to go, before the South Carolina House. But the bill will expand the state's Heritage Act to protect historical monuments and statues, primarily of Confederates and individuals who were dedicated segregationists. It promotes white supremacy, and the law is a point of high contention because it perpetuates the legacy of slavery and segregation. The law, as you mentioned, will also ban what they call the QR, the quick response codes that instantly basically allow users to gain access to digital content. So they don't want for people to see the statues and then hear the narrative of who they truly were, because everybody except South Carolina and a few states in the South still believe in the Confederacy. They believe in racism, and
yeah, they're still fighting the Civil War.
you're still fighting the Civil War. So, when you take a look at the Civil War, Sherry, about 620,000, but more closer to 750,000 deaths, representing 2% of the population at that time died during the Civil War. And there were about 50,000 civilian casualties. So states like South Carolina want to honor traitors. They want to honor uh, people that went against the U.S. government, against the Union. And I find that to be highly deplorable, but they don't care. And, they're still trying to rewrite history. I remember, at the Capitol building, they were still flying a Confederate flag. So, we have a complete distortion of history, but sadly, we still have a lot of people that, support slavery, that, still kill, black folk. And, so they're still trying to, preserve the Confederacy in those states, which, to me is honoring, traitors. The next thing you know is South Carolina may be putting up Nazi statues.
Do you know if this is the $34 million statue garden, or is that a different project?
I think that's a different project. This is
Right.
this is nothing more than to preserve the primarily Confederate statues and statues of politicians that believe in segregation. So they don't want these statues to be taken down or destroyed, but it's really a pity that people still have so much racism and hate coursing through their veins.
Did you see that picture of Trump acting like he was Jesus healing people?
Yes, I did. I
Well, I
saw.
was just wondering because he said, I heal people. And I'm like, okay, that means you don't have any bone spurs anymore, right?
Well, I saw the photo which he generated through artificial intelligence, and he's there, portraying Jesus Christ healing a sick man, and they called him out on it, and then he tried to change the narrative by saying that he was, playing doctor, that he wasn't playing Jesus Christ, that he was playing doctor because he healed people. It was a blasphemous, and
No doubt, no doubt. And then did he
then
turn
this.
the water into wine to celebrate afterwards? Everybody's healed.
Well, he probably used Fanta orange juice instead. Fanta orange soda. But that was blasphemous, and I just find it very repulsive that he's trying to make himself appear like the second coming of the Messiah. And again, the truly tragic situation is that some people in this country actually believe that, he's a Messiah, which is, nothing furthest from the truth. He's a criminal. He's a criminal, but, he does these pictures. And by the way, he said that, he's healed people. And that, by the way, he supports the Red Cross.
Yeah, he said that after they bombed a school of little girls and killed people on fast boats or whatever those boats are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's killed people. He mistreats migrants. His thugs from ICE have killed American citizens, and he has damaged so many people. He's trying to remove health care from millions of Americans. He's destroying, our education.
This last week, he shut down the Fair Housing Enforcement, which is a ban that's been in effect since 1968. Now you can discriminate if you don't want somebody in your neighborhood. You can
Well,
discriminate.
that's true, and he and his father and the family did that when they owned these apartment buildings in New York. The Department of Justice at that time took Fred Trump, his father, to court several times because he would discriminate, especially against African Americans, and refused to rent them apartment buildings. So Donald Trump, instead of learning compassion, morality, decency, empathy, he's basically just done so many horrible, horrible things. And then uh, he and Jay to support Viktor Orban, who is a dictator. He's an authoritative leader that has done a lot of things that Trump has done here in terms of intimidating the media, trying to destroy his political enemies. So these people, you know, are supporting a dictator, a horrible, horrible dictator. And then J.D. Vance gets up before a crowd and he calls Donald Trump and puts him on the mic so he can talk about how great Orban is. Orban's a criminal. But this is the distortion, and I remember reading a book on psychology where entire states and countries can hold false values and virtues. And we, under this administration, are, very, very rapidly going down that road.
He also directed federal law enforcement to investigate select activist organizations that oppose his style of leadership and declared them domestic terrorists, like your No Killings Act and,
Yeah,
you know,
see, passed an executive order. I think it's N as in Nora, M as in Michael, S as in Sierra, P as in Paul, 7. And it's an executive order, requesting more funds to go after domestic terrorists. And specifically, which means anti-fascism, but he still doesn't understand that Antifa is not an organization. It has no infrastructure. It has no leaders. But the fact is that that is all cloaked in the fact that he is going to use this funding for domestic terrorism to go after journalists, to go after, activists, political activists, to go after leaders, in terms of unions and what have you, and going after his political enemies. It's not about going after terrorists, it's about going after U.S. citizens who he considers to be his adversaries, and that is what it's all about.
the day before Iran shot down one of our aircraft, Trump declared that Iran did not have the ability to shoot down our aircraft. Does he know what's going on over there, or is it he's getting his information from Hegseth? How can
He,
this be such a
he's
train
getting
wreck?
he's getting this information from Hegseth. If you want to say reliable information, I think that's totally a different story. As of early April that's early this month, the U.S. has lost at least 7 manned aircraft and about 16 MQ-9 Reaper drones. Donald Trump lies about everything. You'll recall last year when he used stealth bombers to attack 3 sites in Iran that where they were keeping enriched uranium. And he said that everything had been completely obliterated with bunker busters.
Yeah, he lied about that.
Then that narrative changed, and he said that they were 2 weeks away from developing a nuclear weapon. And a reporter asked him, well, I thought you had obliterated all the enriched uranium. And he said, well, yeah, but it's deep in the ground and they have ways of getting it out. I guess they're still working with the shovels to try to dig it out. And so he also stated that they had destroyed pretty much all their military capability, which is not the case. They're still launching attacks on Israel, using, missiles. They have great drone capacity. And you'll recall here a day or two ago, where a couple of days ago that they said that the Strait of Hormuz was now open. Well, now apparently Iranians have closed it down again. So this has been a completely disastrous attack on Iran.
Wait a minute, they closed it down again from
Uh,
this morning?
that's what I heard this morning, that they had closed it down again.
God.
And the thing is that you know they went to war against Iran based on Trump being convinced by Netanyahu, and Netanyahu has been trying to convince past presidents to attack Iran. They knew better, but when he broached it with Donald Trump says, "Well, I think that's a good idea." No strategic thinking, no planning, nothing. They didn't have clearly delineated objectives, no plans for how they were going to withdraw when the time came. And, all of a sudden, it was shifting again, like it did in Venezuela, to regime change. And then Donald Trump stated that, he was going to go into business with Iran to charge ships, you
It's,
know, uh, uh, uh,
it's because
money to transit the Strait of Hormuz. And then he was talking about getting oil. So he's all over the place. There's nothing that is of great focus with Donald Trump. He shifts like the sands in the Sahara. So right now, we have lost men and women from our military. We have spent approximately, and it's probably conservative, about $44 billion,
yeah,
and spending more money. We have created tremendous instability throughout the world, especially in the Persian Gulf area, and and Donald Trump doesn't care. And I don't know when people are going to understand that he doesn't care about the citizens of this country. He doesn't care about the rule of law, and he doesn't care. He doesn't even know what democracy is, for Christ's sake. So we are now engaged in a conflict. We're still in a ceasefire, but the NATO allies that we have in Europe are already having meetings to discuss, the future of NATO and the fact that they're going to have to, you know, you know, uh, comprise
by just America.
the NATO alliance without the United States. Countries around the world no longer want to be allied with the United States based on the attacks by Donald Trump, the, the attacks using tariffs, saying that he wants to incorporate Greenland, Canada, take control over, have the Panama
Well,
Canal, rename the Gulf of Mexico, things of just insanity, insanity. But, we have a very cowardly U.S. Senate and House of Representatives that are controlled by the GOP, and they are so afraid of Trump. Whatever happened to taking a stand on issues, even if it costs you dearly? I believe in the old saying is that a coward dies 1,000 deaths, a hero only dies once. And we have Mike Johnson and all the Republicans that are more concerned about their jobs than they are about the Constitution and democracy here in this country, and that is a very sad statement. And you made a very interesting point, Sherry, in that these guys' reputations will all be gone once Trump leaves, and Trump could care less. He discards a lot of these people, like he did Christine Noem and Pam Bundy, very much like he discards, rappers from the Big Macs that he consumes at Wendy's.
I heard that this is something that kind of bothers me. The Senate rejects an effort to halt arms sales to Israel. They're not supporting Ukraine anymore. Putin didn't want Trump to give Ukraine any missiles to defend themselves, so Trump didn't do it. Why are we not supporting Ukraine having been invaded by this communist country unlawfully without provocation? And Israel's not doing what is being advertised. It seems like they're doing things a little shady. What's going on with that?
Yeah, well, you make a great point is that, Donald Trump and his cabinet, you'll recall, when Zelensky came to the White House for a meeting and they started to attack him and to ridicule a great leader, a leader that has led Ukraine against Russia, He has never abandoned Ukraine. He has never left Ukraine and conducted the war effort from another country. He's there, alongside his soldiers, and they ridicule him about not wearing a suit. They ridicule him about not knowing anything. And, when you take a look at Zelensky, he has more leadership qualities in his little finger than Trump and all of his cabinet. But the Donald Trump admires, and he likes Vladimir Putin. So he has always sided with Putin. Uh, Even though sometimes he talks stuff, to make a show of it. But the arms sales to Israel on the 15th of this month, it appears like everything happened on the 15th of this month. The U.S. Senate rejected the joint resolutions aimed at halting, nearly $450 million in arms sales to Israel. The push to halt the sales was fueled by the mounting humanitarian crises on the Gaza Strip, and then the conflicts that Israel is now engaged in Lebanon and then also Iran. And I will say this, and I will say it very clearly, is that I look at Netanyahu as a war criminal. Netanyahu has been facing charges, criminal charges, but he's remained in power. And I think a lot of these attacks and conflicts he's generated to remain in power so that he's not ousted. But when you take a look at what he did to women and children in the Gaza Strip, and then not allowing water and food to come in, and what he did is, basically committed genocide against the Palestinians. The vast majority of them have never supported Hamas. And, he was bombing, hospitals where, you had sick children. He doesn't care. Now, I have worked with Israel. I have worked with members of the Mossad, with the Israeli Defense Forces, and I support Israel in the effort to defend itself. But I don't support Israel in committing scorched earth policy in its military tactics or trying to commit genocide against the Palestinians. And I will say one thing also is that I believe in a Palestinian homeland. And I will continue to support that because, again, the vast majority of the Palestinians are, human beings just like you and I. So, I don't believe in killing innocent people, and that's usually what these conflicts do. And just like with Iran, where on the first day, I believe, of the conflict, where they go in and they destroy a school and killed over 150 young girls. And those were the first casualties of this conflict. Thousands have now died. Over 1 million people were displaced. And all because, why? Because Donald Trump was jealous that Obama signed the nuclear accord with Iran and he was not the one that did it. So he destroyed it and created mass killings, mass chaos, and just upended a lot of the economy throughout the world. And then alienated a lot of our NATO allies, alienated a lot of countries that are now looking, they're meeting now with Xi Jinping in Beijing to discuss, commercial enterprises with them rather than the United States. So Donald Trump continues to cause untold damage to this country and the entire world.
Yeah, he's trying to recreate what he tore up so he can say he fixed it, but he broke it. So you break it, you buy it.
And the other day, he was saying, well, the strait is open, it's going to remain open permanently. And well, it was open before you went through this. you know what, you cause all this damage, and
Yeah.
that the strait was open, before you created it. So you created all of this disaster, but yet, Congress does not act. The GOP remains silent, and they allow him to do whatever he wants, and they don't act as a check and balance. And if they're not going to do their jobs, they should remove themselves and go sell, something, some tacos at a taco stand.
Did you know that somebody in Arizona wanted to have a Charlie Kirk license plate to honor Charlie Kirk? Funds going apparently to his wife or whoever. And the governor vetoed it because he's like, he's kind of a white supremacist. We're not going to do that.
Well,
Did you hear about that?
I did, but here's the thing: is I'm not a fan of Charlie Kirk, but I will say this is that I don't believe that he should have been assassinated. I don't believe anybody should be killed in the way he was killed. But Charlie Kirk is no hero. Charlie Kirk was a white nationalist supremacist. He embodied racism. But
Yeah, they're trying to make him into a big hero and something he's
yeah,
not.
and the thing is, they're trying to make him into a big hero, which he's not. But the GOP, and I keep harping on the GOP, but it's true. If you notice, they love white supremacists. They love, people that are not, you know, they try to make heroes, try to make chicken salad out of chicken blankety blank. And you remember Kyle Rittenhouse, went out, during some riots, and he's walking on the street with an AR-15, shoots and kills two individuals, and then the GOP was making a national hero. They wanted him to work in Congress.
That
They
little then in prison, his mother with him. She drove him there with the gun to go
yeah,
do what he did.
and
And
walking
this,
down the street and these are the heroes, and these are the people that they want to honor. We have Congressional Medal of Honor winners. We have educators that have dedicated their lives to educating the youth of America. We do have great politicians that want to do the right thing for this country. I always look at, Kelly, that they tried to prosecute because he said that, military people should not follow unlawful acts. That's
right,
his country. John McCain, that, served this country in the military, that was in a prisoner of war camp in Vietnam for about 7 years. Why not honor these people? Why do they focus on, you know,
a golfer like Tiger Woods,
I'm
he
sorry,
got that medal.
yeah,
Trump gave it,
yeah,
and like, what'd he do?
play golf.
And uses drugs and crashes cars.
Yeah, exactly. But these are the people that, and again, I go back to, the saying that, states and countries can hold false values and virtues. These are prime examples of that. And it seems like, we, name buildings and what have you for people that never did anything, or did negative things, or represented, again, white supremacy. And those are the people that we honor. The people that deserve to be honored are not.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. And I also heard that Trump is building this enormous arch. Mr. Bone Spurs wants his arch to be the entrance to Arlington Cemetery. I can't think of a more unworthy person.
Yeah,
And we don't need an arch. There's no price tag that I've seen on this arch. but I'm sure it's, millions and millions. When we start going through what he has spent, he wants his face on the $100 bill too. I don't know who authorized that, but they've got this Trump $100 bill with his face on it looking like the king.
Well, in terms of the arch, the Trump administration, Sherry is couching it, like it's going to be an arch and a patriotic monument to celebrate America's 250th anniversary this year. But it's actually a vanity project.
Yes.
And it's going to be placed at the entrance of the Arlington National Cemetery. It's going to dishonor, as far as I'm concerned, the sacrifice of those buried there by placing them in the shadow of a narcissistic monument. And it's going to cost millions of dollars to taxpayers. And Donald Trump is just focused on leaving some legacy. And I don't know if you've ever,
He's leaving a legacy, all right.
yeah, I don't know, Sherry, we have all known people that have not accomplished very much in their lives, and then they want to create the illusion of being highly successful and do things that, to try to change the fact that they were losers. And I met many of them in my life. But anyway, this is really a disgrace, to the men and women that are buried there because they're heroes. And then you have a draft dodger that wants a monument to himself that received 5 deferments from going to the Vietnam War. He's a man, you'll recall, that would call American servicemen and women losers and suckers. I remember that he was invited to go to an American cemetery in France to honor those members of our military that were buried there. And he didn't want to go because it was raining and he didn't want to get his hair wet. So this
All the orange would fall off. It would just drip off his body.
yeah, so this is a man who is now commander in chief that calls our military members suckers and losers simply because he didn't want to go serve. But on the $100 bill issue, in this month, as of this month, Trump's face has not been approved to be put on the $100 bills. It still remains Benjamin Franklin's image. But what they are doing, as of I believe June, they are going to have all printed currency will have Trump's signature on it. It will be the first time in history that any president, past or present, has had their signature on printed currency, replacing the signature of the U.S. Treasurer. But again, we're dealing with a narcissistic personality. Donald Trump, wants to, we saw what he did with the JFK Center, where he put his name on there. So
Yeah.
I'm actually shocked that he has not yet started a project to put his face on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, there was a $15 million project for an event at Mount Rushmore. I don't know how long that would last, but I just started, making a list of all the money, $4 billion to remodel Air Force One. And we're not talking about the plane he asked Qatar for. That is 42 million to refit that plane. 400 million for the ballroom, 300 billion for the vehicles the ICE agents drive around in.
But
15 million for the event in Mount Rushmore. He had an airport named after himself in Florida. 200 million for an ad for Homeland Security. 42 million for his friend's funeral. 34 million for a statue garden after he bulldozed the Rose Garden. 500 million to paint a section of the border wall. It's not even the whole wall. It's not even both sides.
and that
43 million for his parade. 150 million for the 250 celebration this year that's happening on July 4th. We don't have a price that I know of for the arch. that's happening, nor do we have a price for the alleged remodel of the Kennedy Center that he shouldn't have his name on.
Well, then
That's just the list.
and then take a look at Hegseth that spent $1 billion on food, a piano for some member of the military, lobster tails, and I don't know what else, but $1 billion. And
Yeah,
then it's so hypocritical for Trump to say that they don't have any money or healthcare, and that should fall into the realm of the individual states. Well, the individual states, a vast majority of them, don't have the funding to do that. That is something that should be handled by the federal government. But here they are spending money like drunken sailors, and yet, they continue to profess that they don't have money for health care, but they have money to
to screw around.
go start wars and just basically, throw it all away. And it's tragic, and people really need to stand up, and that's why I support the No King's March, because if we remain silent, we become complicit. And then, what did you think of this feud between Trump and cronies against Pope Leo the 14th, which is ridiculous?
Yeah, it is ridiculous. Him trying to act like the Pope and then coming out with these cartoons of himself as the Pope. He's just,
And then, and then J.D. Vance, said that, the Pope should, watch it, be careful with his words. That was the quote. Yeah, be careful with his words. And this man has no moral ground to stand on when he works for somebody that basically attacked Bob Mueller, and celebrated his death, celebrated the death of Rob Reiner, and then was posting pictures of Obama, like he was an ape, no morality. And J.D. Vance is telling the Pope to be careful with his words. What a freaking hypocrite.
and then Trump also said this past week that he was going to pardon his entire administration before he leaves office. That includes, like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and his other groups of whatever they are. So I'm hoping all these different states are gathering their evidence and gathering their information and taking notes, because he can only pardon them for federal. But I'm also wondering if he's impeached, does he still have the pardon authority?
If he's removed from office, no. But the problem is that the pardons that he provides during the time that he's president can be revoked by the incoming president. They stand. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't know when it comes to presidential pardons. Presidential pardons, you know, uh, portray mercy given to somebody who's been convicted, but they don't denote or signify innocence.
Right.
They do not, signify innocence. And when you take a look at, Trump stating that he's going to give mass pardons to the members of his administration before he leaves, and he talks about the Pope being soft on crime. Well, it wasn't the Pope that pardoned approximately 1,500 traitors who attacked the Capitol building. He hasn't pardoned drug lords like Juan Orlando Hernandez from Honduras. He has not pardoned people that have committed, very severe crimes.
Like
And
Silk Road.
I remember during his first administration, he pardoned a cop killer, and there's still members of law enforcement that support him. I just don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't either. But people need to understand all the stuff is going on, and I know it's exhausting because he has this way of leading that is helter skelter. It's not organized. It's not sophisticated. There's no real thought process other than his MO is to cause chaos. So you're looking over there while I screw somebody over here, and pretty much what he's doing. So I'm hoping people realize that he's spending your money, my money. He's recklessly spending all this money and does have a history of using the bankruptcy system as a way of paying his bills. And anybody who does that should not run for office because that's just not how things are done in the real world.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for coming on too.
Oh, not a problem, Sherry. My pleasure. And, I totally agree with you. I think that, people need to listen to the truth, listen to facts rather than, the fiction that is constantly cycled and recycled and recycled. I think that here in the United States, we have so much media, so many media sources that brainwash people to the point where that lies are truth and that the truth are lies. We're getting that in reverse.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we are. But thank you for coming on and talking with me.
Thank you
And
so
I
much.
you have a great weekend, what's left of it.
Well, thank you so much, Sherry. I wish you a good weekend. Try to get some rest.
There's a concept. Okay. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Sherry.